Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are wrestling with a concept that, I have to say, it goes against nearly every piece of modern self-help advice you've ever heard.
It really does.
We're doing a deep dive into emotional mastery, and the core idea from our source material is, well, it's both simple and profoundly challenging. It's this: your emotions are not your friend.
Yeah, that statement is really designed to make you stop and think, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We live in this culture that just valorizes authenticity, which, is often code for just immediate emotional expression.
Right, speak your truth in the moment, no matter the cost.
Exactly. And it treats our feelings as the ultimate sort of unchallengeable guide. But the sources we're looking at argue that biologically, our emotions are often just automatic, primitive reactions.
Primitive is the key word there.
It is. They're evolutionary tools designed to keep a fragile human alive on the savannah, not to help a CEO navigate a merger or, a parent navigate a tough conversation with their teenager.
I think that definition is so critical. We're talking about emotions as a biological operating system that is, for all intents and purposes, fundamentally outdated for the world we actually live in. And the mission for this entire discussion, for you listening, is to really understand the staggering cost of letting those primitive reactions run the show. We want to unlock the skill set that the sources suggest separates the, quote, top 1% of high achievers from everyone else.
And that skill, it's really the ability to create and then master the space between stimulus and response.
That famous gap.
That's the one. It's that moment where an emotion, anger, anxiety, envy, whatever it is, it arises, you acknowledge it, and then instead of immediately acting on that impulse, you choose a response that's rooted in your long-term goals and your logic and your core values.
It sounds so simple when you say it like that, but it is incredibly difficult because for most people right now, that space it doesn't exist.
No, the reaction is the choice.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, think about the last time you quit a difficult goal. Maybe it was a diet, a fitness plan, a business project.
Okay.
That decision to stop, it rarely comes after some, logical assessment of the project's value. It happens because you felt overwhelmed, or you felt anxious or bored.
That momentary feeling.
That momentary feeling drove a strategic failure. So our goal here is not emotional suppression. We want you to feel everything. It is emotional sovereignty.
Sovereignty. I like that.
Yeah. We want to install the mental hardware and the frameworks that guarantee your actions serve your future self, rather than being hijacked by your frightened present moment self.
Okay, so let's unpack this by first really acknowledging the damage. The source material is very direct in challenging this common delusion that we have.
Yeah.
This idea that strong emotional displays, the heated defense in a meeting, the righteous indignation, that's evidence of passion.
Or even strength.
Or strength, yeah.
And it's actually the opposite of strength. It's evidence of internal disarray. It's a total loss of self-control. And the sources, they give these really concrete examples of how this delusion just actively derails success.
Like in a professional setting.
Yes, take the professional setting. You're in a high-stakes meeting. Someone delivers a critique of your work that feels, targeted or unfair. Immediately, you feel those physical symptoms, that flush of heat in your face, the tightening in your chest.
The edge in your voice when you reply.
That edge in your voice, exactly. And that 60-second reaction, the source is really clear on this. That is the moment you destroy professional capital.
Doesn't matter how good your idea was before that.
It doesn't matter. Your data could be brilliant. Your idea could be valid. But once you respond with that clear emotional dysregulation, you signal to everyone in that room that you are unpredictable under pressure.
You become a liability.
You become the volatile person who has to be managed, not the stable leader who should be followed.
And this damage, it gets even worse in our personal relationships, I'd imagine.
Oh, much worse. Because the stakes are so much higher and the trust is so much deeper. I mean, relational damage escalates when a minor issue, let's say a misunderstanding about chores or schedules,
The classic stuff.
it turns into a full-blown crisis. You stop discussing the actual issue and you start bringing up past hurts or delivering these, calculated, cruel remarks aimed specifically at the other person's vulnerabilities.
You go for the jugular.
You do.
Yeah.
And you turn what should have been a 5-minute problem into a relationship-threatening event that might take days or even weeks of recovery.
Oh.
All because that initial impulse wasn't controlled.
And this is where the brutal biological cost comes in, which I think is critical for people to understand.
It's so important. Every single time you have a high-intensity emotional reaction, your body is flooded with stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline.
Fight or flight.
Exactly. They are essential for fighting or fleeing a predator, but they are absolutely detrimental to high-level cognitive function. They instantly cloud your judgment, they impair your working memory, and they make clear strategic thinking pretty much impossible.
And the most insidious part, which the sources really emphasize, is the lag time. These hormones don't just, vanish instantly.
No, and that's the compound cost. Adrenaline and cortisol, they stay circulating in your system for hours, sometimes days, depending on how severe the reaction was.
Wow, days.
It can be.
Yep.
And this means that a major fight with your spouse before you leave for work or an explosive moment with a colleague, it chemically compromises every single decision you make for the rest of that day.
You're walking around impaired.
You are walking around in a state of compromised decision-making, which leads to poor financial choices, snapping at service people, and just generally eroding your quality of life. The cost isn't just the one incident. It's the ripple effect of impaired judgment that follows.
It really sounds like self-sabotage by chemistry.
That's precisely what it is. And it gets worse because it compounds neurologically. Every time you lose control, you reinforce the very neural pathways that make it easier to lose control next time.
So you're literally practicing failure.
You are literally practicing failure. You are building superhighways in your brain for conflict, for regret, for impulsive behavior. It's this cycle where the more you react, the easier it becomes to react again.
I really want to spend a moment on the structural change you mentioned, because the sources say this is linked to smaller prefrontal cortexes, which is just staggering to me.
It's the ultimate sort of long-term cost. The prefrontal cortex, the PFC, it's the most modern part of your brain. It's your CEO. It's responsible for executive functions like planning, impulse control, complex problem solving.
Moral judgment, filtering out distractions.
All of it. And if chronic stress and unchecked emotional reactions lead to atrophy or shrinking in this region, you become neurologically handicapped in modern life.
So somebody who is consistently impulsive isn't just making a series of bad choices. Their actual brain structure is making high-level performance physically harder for them.
Exactly. I mean, think about what the PFC does. It lets you plan out a budget for the next year, or resist the urge to eat a cookie, or ignore a distracting email while you're focusing on a critical report.
All the hard stuff.
All the hard, valuable stuff. If that area is compromised by chronic stress, which is driven by chronic reactivity, all of those tasks become harder. You struggle with long-term goals because your planning capacity is diminished. You struggle with discipline because your impulse control is weak. It makes success a neurological uphill battle.
And those costs, they translate directly to the bottom line, don't they? We hear stories about executives losing millions in negotiations because they let pride or anger dictate their final offer.
Or entrepreneurs who just destroy years of partnership value in a single, unguarded argument. The ability to remain calm and analytical in the face of pressure is arguably the most valuable financial asset a person can have. When you lose control, you lose leverage. End of story.
And relationally, you mentioned children modeling this behavior.
When children consistently witness emotional outbursts, they learn that's how you deal with stress. They model it. And that leads to family systems that are based on volatility rather than safety and trust. So the compound cost, it's measured in lost money, lost opportunities, and lost trust.
Including self-trust.
Especially self-trust.
That cycle of self-doubt where you know you're capable of more, but you keep falling prey to the same emotional pattern, that is just crippling. But the good news here is that if the brain can be wired for failure, it can also be wired for success.
Exactly. To rewire the system, you first have to understand the default settings.
Yeah.
You need to, look under the hood at the hardware you're dealing with, which has been driven by millions of years of evolution.
And the sources introduce us to the central villain here, or maybe just the well-meaning but totally flawed alarm system, the amygdala.
The amygdala. It's literally an almond-shaped structure deep in your limbic system, the ancient emotional part of the brain.
Yeah.
Its job is incredibly simple. Immediate threat detection.
That's it.
That's it. In our ancestral environment, if you saw movement in the bushes, the amygdala fired, flooded your system with hormones, and prepared you to run or fight. It was a life-saving mechanism.
But the core of the problem, this evolutionary mismatch you're talking about, is that the amygdala is just terrible at nuance.
It has zero subtlety, none whatsoever. It cannot differentiate between a physical threat, a charging saber-toothed tiger, and a social threat.
Like a harshly worded email.
A harshly worded email, public criticism, even a perceived slight on social media. It interprets these modern, social slights as life or death situations, triggering the exact same ancient physiological response. And that is the amygdala hijack.
So when my colleague gives me some harsh feedback, my brain literally thinks I'm about to be eaten.
Absolutely. 100%. And the consequence of that hijack is immediate cognitive decline. Blood flow is physically diverted away from your prefrontal cortex, your rational control center,
Right.
and it's shunted toward the limbic system and your motor function centers.
So you can run.
So you can run or fight. The sources are unequivocal on this. When you are emotionally hijacked, you literally become less intelligent. You lose the capacity for complex reasoning and foresight.
I really struggle with the speed mismatch here. This seems almost insurmountable. The sources say the amygdala processes threats and triggers this reaction in about 12 milliseconds.
It is brutal. It's faster than a blink of an eye. Meanwhile, your rational prefrontal cortex, your PFC, it needs at least 500 milliseconds, a full half a second to process the same information and formulate a logical response.
Half a second feels like an eternity in comparison.
It is. By the time your rational self even registers what happened, the emotional reaction is already fired, and the stress hormones are already flooding your body. You've already made the impulsive choice. Your rational brain is just showing up afterward to watch the fallout and then try to rationalize the damage.
So if the emotional impulse is, 40 times faster than the rational thought, how is achieving this level 4 mastery even biologically possible? It feels like we are just designed to fail.
That's a powerful and a really necessary question. We're not designed to control that initial flicker of emotion. That first 12 millisecond reaction is automatic. You can't stop it.
Okay.
The mastery comes from training the system to interrupt the chain reaction that follows. We train the PFC to jump in around that 500 millisecond mark and assert dominance over the limbic system. And that requires massive repetition and very specific techniques like conscious breathing, which we'll get into later. We're basically building a detour around the emergency road.
And we also need to talk about how the amygdala learns bad habits. It seems to expand its definition of threat over time.
This is one of the most frustrating parts of the whole system. Every time you have a strong emotional reaction, the amygdala sees it as validation. It thinks, see, I was right. That was dangerous.
So it files it away as evidence.
It files it away as a reason to be even more vigilant next time. For instance, if you experience a professional failure and feel intense shame, the amygdala learns that risk-taking is painful. And you become risk-averse, fearful of opportunity, and hypersensitive to any hint of future failure. It actively programs you for avoidance.
Which sounds like it feeds directly into the well-documented negativity bias.
It does. The negativity bias is another evolutionary leftover. I mean, for our ancestors, it was way more important to remember the one tree that had poisonous berries than the 100 trees that had edible ones.
Survival depended on it.
Exactly. Survival depended on prioritizing threats. Today, this just manifests as your brain constantly scanning the horizon for problems, focusing on failures over successes, and amplifying potential dangers. This keeps the amygdala on high alert, making emotional volatility kind of a default state.
And the modern world is just a pressure cooker for this system, constantly keeping the amygdala activated.
It's a perfect storm. Think about the sensory input you get every day. Constant notifications, the curated outrage cycle of social media, 247 access to global crises, the expectation of instant email responses. It creates this environment of sustained, low-level stress. Your brain interprets this constant bombardment as perpetual danger, which just lowers the threshold for what it considers a threat.
So we become hypersensitive. A minor delay in traffic or a slightly rude comment from a waiter is suddenly enough to trigger a full-blown internal emotional crisis.
Precisely. And then physical factors actively stack the deck against us. The sources highlight that just not getting enough sleep is one of the fastest ways to lose control.
I've definitely felt that.
Oh, yeah. They cite research showing that sleep deprivation makes the amygdala a staggering 40% more reactive to negative stimuli.
40%.
40%. When you're tired, you are chemically incapable of dealing with even minor stress. Similarly, dehydration, poor nutrition leading to unstable blood sugar, a lack of movement, all of these things impair the PSC's ability to regulate the system.
So the goal isn't to stop that initial emotion. The goal is to use your body and your mind to find that microsecond gap and train the prefrontal cortex to be the final authority on how you actually respond.
Right. And since emotional mastery is a journey, it's not a switch you just flip, the 4 levels outlined by the source material provide this vital roadmap. It helps you assess where you are and where you need to go.
It helps us get away from the all or nothing thinking.
Exactly. We have to move beyond I have control or I don't. It's a spectrum.
Okay, so let's start with the base level, which is the starting point for most of humanity. Levels 1 and 2, which are all about reactivity. Level 1 is unconscious reactivity.
This is emotional default mode. The person has absolutely no conscious awareness that they even have a choice in the matter. Their feelings are treated as objective, unchangeable facts.
So they externalize all the blame.
Completely.
Yeah.
They say things like, you made me angry, or I can't help the way I feel. They're purely a victim to their mood states, which leads to highly unpredictable behavior that erodes all trust, both from others and, crucially, in themselves. This person might feel intense shame later, but in the moment, they are completely on autopilot.
Okay, then we move to a slightly more advanced, but I think maybe more frustrating stage. Level 2, conscious reactivity.
The frustration here is that awareness exists. The person knows intellectually that they are about to make a poor choice. They feel that pause, they recognize the looming regret, but they choose the reactive action anyway because in the moment it just feels so overwhelmingly justified.
The internal justification is they had it coming.
They had it coming, or my anger is valid and I need to express it. That's the one.
That sounds like a really nasty self-reinforcing trap. They know the better path, but they choose the easier, more immediate emotional payoff.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it leads to these persistent cycles of self-disappointment. They acknowledge the space between stimulus and response, but they just refuse to inhabit it. And this erodes self-confidence profoundly because they know their word to themselves can't be trusted. They have the awareness, but their willpower isn't yet strong enough to enforce their values over their impulse.
Okay, so now we cross the threshold into true control with levels 3 and 4. Level 3 is conscious response. This is where the real work begins.
Level 3 is the operational foundation of emotional maturity and really high performance. The core principle here is that emotions are treated as data. They're information, but they're never instructions.
Data, not a directive.
Exactly. You might feel immense fear before a big presentation, but you consciously choose to proceed because taking that action aligns with your goals. You might feel furious during a disagreement, but you choose to speak calmly and deliberately because you're prioritizing resolution over just venting.
And this requires incredible, deliberate practice. You're actively choosing the hard path over the easy one every single time.
It does. It requires constantly identifying that impulse and then substituting a learned strategic response. And it's often an imperfect, messy process at first. It takes immense mental energy, but it pays huge dividends in stability and predictability. This is the difference between a high achiever and someone who is perpetually frustrated.
And then we get to the mastery level, level 4, emotional alchemy.
This is the pinnacle. At this level, you're not just controlling the response, you're actually transforming the emotional energy itself.
What does that look like?
When anger arises, the mind immediately shifts to finding the useful motivation within that energy. When fear hits, it gets reframed as focused excitement or anticipation. Disappointment becomes curiosity. What did I learn from this unexpected result?
It sounds like becoming the director of your own internal movie. You're consciously choosing the emotional state that best serves your highest value.
That is the perfect way to put it. You are not waiting for an emotion to happen to you. You are orchestrating your internal state. It means restructuring your thinking patterns so thoroughly that the negative feedback loop of fear, anger, and shame is replaced by a positive, productive loop of curiosity, motivation, and calm. And while it takes years of practice, achieving this level is what frees up massive mental bandwidth for true creativity and innovation.
So when the amygdala hijack is in full swing, when you're in that 12-millisecond reaction, you need a tool that's so simple and so automatic that your compromised prefrontal cortex can actually still deploy it.
Right.
You can't use complex, nuanced analysis in that moment.
No, you need immediate, real-time triage. And this is where the sources introduced the STOP method. It's specifically designed to interrupt that physiological stress cascade. It's a battle-tested method, often used in high-stakes environments, where clarity under pressure is everything.
Okay, let's walk through the steps, starting with the most critical one.
Yep.
S-stop.
S is about a physical, absolute cessation of action. If you feel that impulse to fire back a toxic email, your hands must come off the keyboard.
Literally.
Literally. If you're about to shout back in an argument, you must physically close your mouth and refuse to utter another word. The key to the S is recognizing the early warning signs, those somatic cues we talked about.
The rapid heartbeat, the tense jaw.
A rapid heartbeat, the tension in your jaw or shoulders, the shallow breathing, the heat in your face. These aren't just symptoms, they're your cues to immediately deploy the signer.
Stop. And this requires you to accept a moment of awkwardness, right? You might look a bit weird just suddenly halting mid-sentence.
You absolutely have to accept the awkwardness. That temporary feeling of social strangeness is infinitely preferable to the long-term damage caused by the full reaction. The physical halt sends the first powerful signal to your brain that the conscious, rational self is overriding the physical impulse. It has to be decisive and complete.
Okay, so you've stopped the action. Now you have to manage the nervous system itself. T, take a breath.
And this is not just a simple sigh of exasperation. This is structured, targeted, physiological intervention. The source specifically recommends box breathing.
Okay, how does that work?
You inhale for 4 seconds, you hold your breath for 4 seconds, and then, crucially, you exhale slowly for 6 seconds. And you repeat that a minimum of 3 times.
Why is that longer exhale so important?
It all comes down to the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve. It runs from your brainstem down to your abdomen, and it's the primary component of your parasympathetic nervous system.
The rest and digest system.
The rest and digest system. When you exhale deeply and slowly, you stimulate that vagus nerve. And that is the mechanism that tells your heart rate to slow down and tells your body to halt the release of adrenaline and cortisol. You are manually resetting your nervous system.
Yeah.
Without this step, you're just trying to reason your way out of a chemical flood, which is nearly impossible.
All right, so action is halted, nervous system is calming down. Now we have enough space for over-observe.
And observation requires objectivity and curiosity, not judgment. You assess your internal and external environment. Internally, you label the emotion. I feel intense anger, and it's coupled with a profound fear of being misunderstood.
Getting specific.
Very specific. And externally, you separate the facts from the interpretations. The fact is, the client sent a terse one-line email. The interpretation is, the client hates me and I'm going to lose the contract.
And the brain defaults to that catastrophic interpretation every time. Observation breaks that cycle.
It does. It forces you to look at your assumption and ask, is there another plausible explanation? Maybe the client is just busy. Maybe they dictated the email in a rush. Observation transforms the situation from a personal attack into a data point. You're just gathering information about your own state and the actual circumstances.
And finally, P, proceed. This is the conscious choice, guided by your values.
This is where that level 3 mastery gets practiced. You ask yourself, what response aligns with my long-term goals and the person I want to be? If your goal is professional trust, proceeding with an aggressive defense is counterproductive.
So the best action might be no action.
Exactly. The best proceed action might be silence, or maybe delaying the response until tomorrow. Or it might be approaching the situation with non-judgmental curiosity, saying, I sense some frustration in your email. Could you clarify which part of the proposal caused you the greatest concern? The Essa-Payer method ensures that the 12-millisecond impulse is overridden by the half-second rational self.
Okay, so moving past that emergency phase, we can now look at techniques that are designed not just for damage control, but for actively optimizing our emotional stability and really enhancing our performance.
Right, our first advanced technique is cognitive reframing. And this really addresses the root cause of so much emotional distress, which is just flawed interpretation.
The stories we tell ourselves.
Exactly. Events don't cause our emotions, our meaning-making does. So we have to actively challenge our default stories.
Can you give me a real-world scenario where this would make a huge difference?
Sure. Let's take an entrepreneur who receives a major setback. A funding round falls through.
Okay, a painful one.
A very painful one. The catastrophic default interpretation is, I am a failure. This business is doomed. And that interpretation triggers intense shame and disappointment.
Right.
Cognitive reframing forces them to generate alternatives. Alternative one could be, this funding fell through because the investor's portfolio strategy changed, not because of my idea.
Okay, so it's not about you.
Right. Alternative two, a positive one. This forces me to be leaner, more creative, and prove the model with less delusion. Or alternative three, a neutral one. This is merely a temporary condition that's providing necessary market feedback.
So by forcing yourself to generate at least 3 plausible interpretations, you strip the emotional power away from that initial catastrophic thought.
Exactly. You are literally training your brain to see complexity and utility, and you're countering the amygdala's simplistic, survival-based narrative. You then get to choose the interpretation that is most productive for moving forward, which makes the emotion that follows, like motivation or determination, equally productive.
The next technique, emotional labeling, seems deceptively simple, but the sources imply it's a really powerful neurological hack.
Oh, it is. It's often called affect labeling. The issue is that when we're upset, we often use really blunt language like, I feel bad or I'm stressed.
It's not very precise.
No. That lack of precision leaves the emotion formless and overwhelming. The solution is to become surgically precise, distinguishing disappointment from frustration, or anxiety from sadness, or envy from respectful admiration.
Why does simply naming the feeling precisely give us that control?
Because naming the feeling requires language processing, which is primarily handled by the prefrontal cortex. So by forcing that verbalization, I am not just stressed, I am feeling overwhelmed by task volume and disappointed in my performance. You immediately increase PFC activity.
And that calms the amygdala.
It does. That PFC activation literally acts as a dampener on the amygdala, reducing the intensity of the emotional reaction. It brings the feeling out of the chaotic limbic system and into the logical executive function area, which makes it manageable.
Okay, moving to somatic regulation, which is about using the body to regulate the mind. That's essential because the body is the first place stress really shows up.
Totally. We have to give the body an outlet for all that energy the amygdala created. Progressive muscle relaxation is fantastic for this. Systematically tensing muscle groups, like tighten your hands into fists for 10 seconds and then completely releasing them.
You can feel the tension leave.
You can. It discharges the trapped physical energy from the fight-or-flight response, and that prevents it from spiraling into sustained anxiety.
And I'm really interested in the power of temperature regulation, specifically cold exposure.
Cold exposure is a very rapid method for sympathetic nervous system intervention. A short cold shower, or even just submerging your face in ice water, causes this rapid activation of the vagus nerve.
Shock to the system.
The shock forces a massive system reset. It moves you from high alert, the sympathetic state, immediately into a state of calm, the parasympathetic state. You're training your body to endure acute discomfort without losing internal composure. And, of course, sustained movement and exercise, not just for fitness, but to burn off the chemically induced energy that your body created for a fight it didn't have.
Let's talk about timeline reframing, because when you're in a moment of emotional distress, the problem just feels permanent.
It feels all-consuming. Timeline reframing is a powerful antidote to that short-term emotional catastrophe. You force yourself to gain perspective by projecting forward. You ask yourself, how will I feel about this stressful email in 1 week, in 6 months, in 5 years?
Yeah.
And when you realize that the thing causing you intense emotional pain right now will be utterly insignificant in a year, the immediate emotional impact just plummets. It connects you to your future, more detached self, and allows that future self to advise your current state.
And finally, there's the strategic element here, energy management, because our regulation capacity is finite.
It's a battery. Emotional regulation is mentally exhausting. If you are constantly managing stress, you deplete your mental resources, which leads to decision fatigue and eventual collapse back into level 1 or 2 reactivity.
So you have to be strategic.
You have to be. Proactively avoid high-stress people or situations when you know you're already tired or hungry. Schedule those challenging, emotionally charged conversations early in the morning when your regulation capacity is highest. And prioritize recovery as a non-negotiable part of your high-performance schedule to ensure you are never operating on an empty tank of self-control. So we've moved from immediate triage to optimization. Now we're addressing resilience, the ability to not just bounce back from stress, but to actually become stronger because of it.
Anti-fragile.
Anti-fragile. And the sources are really clear that resilience is never built during a crisis. It is forged during periods of calm through consistent daily conditioning.
And this all starts with Pillar 1, baseline optimization, the physical foundation upon which all our emotional stability rests.
Right. And sleep is the absolute bedrock. We already mentioned that 40% increase in amygdala reactivity when sleep is poor. Consistent, high-quality sleep, 7 to 8 hours, adhering to a consistent schedule in a cool, dark room, it is not a luxury or a treat.
It's a requirement.
It's a non-negotiable requirement for emotional regulation. If you compromise your sleep, you're knowingly compromising your ability to remain calm and rational the next day.
Okay, next is nutrition, fueling the brain for stability.
The brain is extraordinarily energy-intensive, and fluctuations in blood sugar trigger instability and irritability. The foundational disciplines are actually quite simple. Consume adequate protein with every meal to stabilize blood sugar, ensure you're getting enough omega-3 fatty acids for structural brain health, and maintain strict hydration.
And what to avoid.
Actively eliminating inflammatory foods excessive sugar, and highly processed carbohydrates. That removes the biochemical triggers for emotional instability. You just cannot have a high-performing brain if you're fueling it with low-grade, volatile energy sources.
And exercise, it's foundational, not just supplemental.
It's absolutely non-optional. Beyond cardiovascular health, it releases BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which promotes the growth of new brain cells and enhances neuroplasticity.
It makes your brain more adaptable.
More adaptable. It stabilizes mood by regulating serotonin and dopamine. And critically, we need both aerobic training, which builds stress tolerance, and strength training, which builds a physical confidence that translates directly into mental toughness. Activities that challenge coordination, like martial arts or dance, they force the brain to integrate motor and cognitive control, which further strengthens the PFC.
Let's move to the cognitive pillar, starting with pillar 2, cognitive flexibility.
Cognitive flexibility is the ability to shift your perspective, to admit you might be wrong, and to adapt quickly to changing information. Low cognitive flexibility leads to rigid, amplifying emotional patterns.
So how do you build it?
The sources suggest intentionally seeking out and consuming information from opposing viewpoints without judgment. Engage in conversations with people whose values conflict with yours, not to change their mind, but to understand their framing.
That sounds like voluntary exposure to disagreement.
It is. And it's also about building comfort with uncertainty. If you can make decisions with incomplete information and accept that outcomes are ambiguous, you drastically reduce the emotional stress that's associated with feeling out of control. That comfort with ambiguity is a direct measure of cognitive flexibility.
Okay, pillar 3, meaning making.
Resilience just skyrockets when individuals connect their daily struggles and their efforts to a larger overarching purpose. Whether that's a commitment to a family, building a mission-driven business, or serving a community cause, having clear values makes the short-term emotional pain bearable.
It gives it context.
It gives it context,
Yeah.
and it allows you to ask, is this momentary anger serving my purpose? And the answer is almost always a resounding no. Regular reflection, maybe journaling about your core values, ensures this purpose stays at the forefront of your mind.
Then we have pillar 4, social connection.
Humans are wired for connection. Isolation is a massive stressor that degrades our regulation capacity. However, you have to be strategic about it.
How so?
The source is very clear. You must minimize contact with emotionally volatile and draining people, and you must invest heavily in relationships with emotionally mature individuals who model the calm, responsive behavior you want to cultivate. Your brain's mirror neurons will subconsciously adopt the emotional climate you consistently immerse yourself in.
And the deliberate discomfort of pillar 5, strategic stress exposure.
This is the gym for emotional resilience. It's progressive overload. You have to intentionally choose challenges that force you outside your comfort zone, but in a controlled way.
For example,
This could be volunteering for public speaking, taking on a highly complex project at work, or engaging in endurance sports. The point is to practice maintaining your composure and making rational decisions while you are under genuine stress. If you only practice emotional control in a quiet room, you will fail in the marketplace.
and finally, the essential counterbalance, pillar 6, recovery and restoration.
Recovery is the stage where the adaptation and the growth actually happen. Without it, the system just remains in chronic overload. This includes structured daily practices like mindfulness or meditation, which strengthens the attention circuits you need for the SCP method.
But it's more than that.
Oh yeah. It also means scheduling weekly time in nature, completely disconnected from technology, and ensuring you take longer annual disconnection periods. Recovery time is not a luxury. It is the scheduled time when your brain integrates all these new, resilient pathways.
Okay, so let's apply all these concepts to some tangible, real-world outcomes, starting with the foundation of personal success, confidence. The sources redefine confidence not as the absence of fear, but as the deep internal knowledge that you can handle any situation life throws at you.
And that knowledge is built through evidence, not through wishful thinking or affirmations. Every single time you successfully deploy the STP method, every time you choose a conscious response over a reaction, you are accumulating proof for your brain that you are capable of handling distress.
You're building a track record with yourself.
A track record. This constant accumulation of evidence builds genuine, unshakable self-reliance, the profound realization that your emotional state is not dependent on external events or other people's behavior. That is the highest form of confidence.
Now let's talk relationships. This is often the biggest crucible for high achievers.
Absolutely. Relationship failures frequently stem from highly predictable, repetitive emotional patterns. We get into a reactive cycle, often rooted in childhood triggers, and we fail to prioritize the relationship itself over our immediate need to be right.
So the first principle of mastery here is choosing connection versus control.
Yes, emotional reactivity is always an attempt to control the outcome or to control the other person. Strategic non-reaction prioritizes maintaining the connection, even if it means momentarily letting go of being right,
That immediately leads us to the 50% rule.
which is crucial for energy conservation. You only control your 50% of the interaction, your words, your tone, your response. You have to stop wasting emotional energy trying to control or fix or change the other person's reaction.
Just focus on your side of the street.
Exactly. When you focus purely on stabilizing your half, you become the grounding, calming force in the interaction, which subtly shifts the entire dynamic.
And what's a practical technique for that?
De-escalation. If the other person raises their voice, your biological instinct is to match or exceed that energy. This strategic response is counterintuitive. You consciously lower your voice, you slow your rate of speech, and you soften your posture.
You're signaling safety.
You're signaling safety and calm, which helps break that mirror neuron contagion that fuels escalation. It takes immense self-control to speak quietly when you really want to shout.
The sources introduce an advanced skill called emotional aikido. I'd love a deeper dive into how that actually works in a conversation.
Emotional aikido is the art of redirecting an opponent's emotional energy instead of meeting it head-on. If you absorb their attack, you get hurt. If you fight back, the conflict just escalates. With aikido, you accept the energy and you use it to move the conversation to a more productive space.
Can you give us a script example for that?
Certainly. Imagine a colleague delivers some harsh criticism, maybe calling your plan reckless.
Okay.
The reactive response is defense. It is not reckless. I have 3 months of data to prove it.
Right, you get your backup.
Exactly. The aikido response is different. You pause, you regulate, and then you respond. Thank you for being direct about your concerns. Reckless is a strong word, and I appreciate your perspective. Could you tell me specifically which part of the financial projection makes you feel that way so I can ensure we address the risk?
Wow. So you've completely accepted their energy and then immediately pivoted to curiosity and problem solving instead of defense.
You didn't absorb the judgment, and you didn't fight the word reckless. You thanked them for their contribution, and you used their strong emotional terminology to ask for specific, actionable data. You redirected that volatile energy toward collaboration. That is the hallmark of level 4 mastery in relationships.
Finally, let's look at emotional leadership and influence. This is pure emotional modeling, isn't it?
100%. A leader's emotional state is contagious. The team, the family, the entire organization will mirror the person at the top. Remaining calm and transparently regulated under pressure gives everyone else permission to do the same.
And this is essential for creating psychological safety.
Which is entirely based on how a leader responds to mistakes. If you react with blame and anger, people hide their mistakes. If you respond with calm curiosity, okay, what can we learn from this data point? People become honest, innovative, and resilient.
Leaders also need to actively practice emotional contagion management.
Yes. Before walking into a room, especially a high-stakes one, a leader must consciously decide what emotional state they want to transmit. If you're feeling anxious, you perform the SOP method before you enter. You consciously choose the desired state, calm, confidence, measured determination, and you let that be the energy you project.
Which requires empathy, but not absorption.
Right. It requires empathetic leadership without emotional absorption, understanding that your team is anxious, but maintaining clear emotional boundaries so that their anxiety doesn't derail your clarity and your stability. And the truly exciting part of all this work is the understanding that this is not just self-help platitudes. It creates actual measurable physical changes in your brain structure. This is the principle of neuroplasticity in action.
It's real.
It's very real. Every single time you choose a response using the S.P method, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with self-control, and you literally preen back the reactive impulsive pathways.
And the sources confirm that mental rehearsal, just visualization, can accelerate this.
It absolutely can. If you spend time visualizing yourself handling that next argument or negotiation with perfect composure, you are strengthening those self-control circuits almost as effectively as if you were doing it in real life. The physical changes are documented. People who practice emotional regulation show increased gray matter density in the prefrontal cortex.
The planning and control center gets
It
stronger.
gets stronger. It gets thicker.
And what happens to that overzealous alarm system, the amygdala?
The good news is that the volume knob turns down. Chronic emotional control leads to a measurable reduction in the size and hyperactivity of the amygdala.
It actually shrinks.
It can. This doesn't mean you stop feeling fear or emotion. It just means your threat detection system becomes more accurate. It fires fewer false alarms for non-physical threats. We also see a strengthening in the anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC, which is the brain's conflict monitor.
So you can catch the impulse earlier.
You can catch that initial flicker of emotion even faster, which allows you to deploy the SOTP method earlier and more effectively.
The chemical payoff from this must be tremendous.
It's profound. Stable emotional regulation leads to healthier baseline levels of your key neurotransmitters. Serotonin and dopamine become more stable, which contributes to consistent motivation and mood. Most importantly, the level of the stress hormone cortisol decreases significantly, and the speed at which your body recovers from stress dramatically increases.
Which has huge long-term health benefits.
Massive long-term health benefits, better immune function, and a reduced risk of chronic disease.
And circling back to our social environment, the role of mirror neurons really reinforces why Pillar 4 is so important.
It does. Mirror neurons mean that emotional maturity is, quite literally, contagious. Your brain automatically mirrors and simulates the emotional states and actions of the people around you. If you spend your time with people who are calm, reflective, and non-reactive, your brain is actively training itself to adopt those same regulated patterns.
And the opposite is also true.
And if you spend your time with chaotic, volatile people, you are training your brain for chaos. This is why choosing your inner circle is perhaps the most strategic decision you can make for your own emotional mastery.
So tying this all together, what is the ultimate compound interest of this mastery?
The benefits, they accumulate exponentially over time. The first key effect is relational trust. Your consistency and your stability become a resource that people rely on. When a crisis hits, you're the person others seek out for advice, which naturally opens doors to greater responsibility and influence.
And then there's the quality of your decision-making.
Since you're no longer making choices based on fear or shame or momentary anger, your decisions just become consistently better. And that leads to superior long-term outcomes in your finances, your health, your career, and your relationships. It's a relentless upward spiral of high-quality choices.
And your ability to learn and grow.
The emotional drama that's usually associated with mistakes and failures, it gets eliminated. You free up massive amounts of mental energy, which can now be dedicated to deep work and growth. You become radically better at receiving and applying feedback because your defensive mechanisms are disarmed. And that accelerated learning curve creates an insurmountable competitive advantage over time.
So it sounds like opportunity creation flows directly from inner stability.
Absolutely. Emotional maturity is the ultimate currency. When you are trusted with sensitive information and you consistently demonstrate stability under pressure, you attract the highest levels of opportunity and the highest caliber of partners. The compound effect is just profound. Greater stability, superior health, deeper trust, and accelerated achievement. Hashtag tag outro. So we've covered a substantial journey today, from diagnosing the problem of our evolutionary mismatch to mastering the immediate triage of the Estoppel method and committing to those 6 pillars of long-term anti-fragile resilience. And remember the timeline for this transformation. Within 2 to 4 weeks of consistent application, you will notice differences in your reactivity. Structural brain change starts to become significant around 8 to 12 weeks, and complete pattern transformation that can require 6 months to 2 years of dedicated practice.
This work makes you anti-fragile. You don't just survive challenges, you use the stress of life as leverage to become psychologically and neurologically stronger. The goal is to become that anchor, that person who remains unshakable and clear-headed while chaos swirls around them, becoming a source of peace for yourself and for everyone in your orbit.
Emotional mastery is not the work you do when everything else is finished. It is the fundamental investment that allows all other high-level work to succeed.
So here is your challenge for today, right now. Think about one specific person or one situation that is a guaranteed trigger for you. A certain type of work email, a particular tone of voice from a partner, a social media comment. And commit to applying just the S&T of the S-Stop-P method, the physical stop and the structured, take a breath, the very next time that specific trigger arises. Don't worry about O or P yet, just create the gap. That small conscious intervention is where your compound interest in self-mastery begins.